Welcome. We'll get started in a couple minutes.
Oh yeah. So much easier. Language is
We'll get started in like 2 minutes.
I was like, That dude was so the 80s, focused on popular. Yeah, it started a little rock. Maybe he quit. No, he was. I heard it.
We've got like 10 people online. So. Yeah, they should have got
Oh,
friends join us online. So I just want to give a brief introduction and then we'll get into our story. So I'm Crystal LaFollette. I'm the instructor for the course. And it's going to be my pleasure to be with you all this semester. So I wanted to just thank you for joining us. This semester, all of the students, all of you have persevered through a really formidable time. It's been incredibly challenging. We've dealt with a real changing academic landscape and all of the pressures that have been going on and continue to go on with the pandemic. But you've kind of worked your way through it and done very, very well. I'm very proud of you. You've all studied oral history, the oral history method and theory, and put it into practice. You recorded 22 interviews this semester. This is a big feat. And these were conducted with members of the Monterey County Theater Alliance, members of the LGBTQ community, and then also other individuals you know who have interesting stories to tell. And so these monologues that we'll be reading are recorded, are edited from the recordings, edited from the transcripts of the oral histories, and they're ones that each of the students have selected that they feel represents their narrative. So let's get started.
Hi, I'm Dylan, and my narrator was the formidable Howard Burnham. And here we go. My father was a son of an American mining engineer who went to South Africa and then ended up in England, which is why I talk in this accent. So a lot of my relatives are American, and I'm a quarter American from my grandfather. And my mother was Cockney from London, through and through. My father was a rich kid. He went up to Cambridge, to King's College. Cambridge to read history, but had too much money and was rusticated in. The family then packed him off to India to work for the Imperial Tobacco Company, which, according to some legend, he instead ran a brothel. And then, fortunately, World War II broke out, and he found his true vocation as a soldier. He liked the army. He had an interesting war, which got progressively more dangerous. He started off fighting the Italians, who didn't want to fight in North Africa. Then he fought the Vinci French in Madagascar, and they actually shot back and put shrapnel into his leg from a mortar shell. And then he was invalided in Nairobi in Kenya. And when he recovered, they told him he was going to raise a battalion of the King's African Rifles and take them off to Burma to fight the Japanese, which wasn't quite so much fun. But mercifully, he survived and came back to England and produced me because I am a victory baby. I came in 46. Like many ex-officers in World War II, you either hit the Bible or the bottle. My father hit the bottle and toddled off when I was 12 years of age. I suppose I was interested in history because my father was interested in history, because he had attempted to read for a degree at Cambridge in history. And I've always sort of loved narrative. I love stories and history. Of course, the story of total human existence is also a very dishonest discipline, because every generation rewrites it, and it can be twisted in so many perverse ways. But I've always enjoyed history, because history is where we come from, was what made us what we are. I'm primarily an actor and an educator, and I don't get completely obsessed with uniform accuracy, and I'm certainly not going to wear some sort of heavy woolen uniform in the heat of the Carolinas. I skimp a bit and produce my own lightweight undergarments and things like that, but I'm not obsessed with every single button has to be correct, but I like to be as accurate as I can. And certainly the stories that I give about these various characters, like poor old gentleman Johnny Boulogne and Lord Cornwallis and various other redcoats. Of all, my favorite is Bannister Tarleton, the most hated British officer in the Revolutionary War. I love doing him because I can tell everybody that I wasn't killed by Mel Gibson in the final reel of The Patriots. Tarleton lived to a disgraceful old age in England, covered with honors and glory. I was very lucky, very lucky. I had quite a lot of friends in the library services and also at the university. My wife did not enjoy South Carolina because she came across far too much of the Southern Baptist fundamentalist mentality, the ultra-right-wing sort of thing. But fortunately, my dear uncle, who used to live in San Diego, then lived his most latter part of his life on Key Largo, he fell off his perch about 10 years ago, and he had no children, and luckily I was one of his beneficiaries. And we could afford to move to South Carolina, from South Carolina to California. The house was sold in South Carolina, could just about buy a garage in Pacific Grove. But fortunately, with Uncle Tom Shekels, we could come to PG. He was very, very fond of my life and quite fond of me. And I was quite glad to be able to sort of show him what I can do with my acting, because my father never saw me act because he died when I was 12. So I used to say to Uncle Tom, I never sang for my father, but I can sing for you.
Hi, my name is Teresa Meister, and my narrator is Carol Markov. I always wanted to participate in theater, so I remember that when I first moved here many years ago, I would do the California First Theater. You know where it is, down on Pacific and Scott. It's the old First Theater, and they would do melodramas, and they were written by a local person, plays from the 19th century, and she would almost verbatim write the script and give it to us. So we were trying to make it funny, but it tended to be moralistic. You know, with the hero and the villain and that, and the damsel in distress. And at the end, I always played the Irish wife with the bad Irish accent. Then afterwards, we would sing these old-time songs and everybody would clap. I mean, it was fun. I just loved to be in the theater. Then I started to write, and I have a whole bin under my bed, about 3 or 4 bins under my bed, of some of the earliest plays that I wrote. It was like being a painter. The first paintings aren't that good, but I've saved them all. I'm fascinated with brilliant people, whether they are good or bad. I'm just fascinated with them. I think I know some of my characters better than I know myself, and that's okay. You know, fabulous. Orson Welles in the beginning of a book I have of his, and I've never written about him, and I never will. But Orson Welles said, I don't really like myself, but I like what I do. Frank Lloyd Wright was a genius, but I think I was caught up in the scandals of his life, which were very interesting, much more interesting than his architecture. Early on, I wrote about Rasputin, and he was a very dark figure. He brought down the entire Tsar monarchy. I mean, these stories were so interesting to bring them to life. They're much more interesting than some of the movies we see today. They have to rewrite Shakespeare to make it, relevant to today's politics. And I object to that. They rewrote the Christmas Carol, and the heroine is not Scrooge, but Carol Scrooge. It's feminist. It's now about feminism.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael, and I'm going to be reading for Harriet Lynn. Well, I always loved art, loved history, and kind of pulled all those things together later in life. I didn't know that there was a place for it, so I ended up, years later, working with museums, doing museum theater, oral history performance, working with artists. And I love art. I really do. It's like going to church for me, going into a museum. Yeah, it's a great place to be. So I really enjoyed those things. I really love photography. I didn't know that then when I was younger, you asked. But what I do love, I love photography. I can't help it, I keep shooting. I went down to Monastery Beach yesterday and I was shooting. So anyway, my curiosity about that, I love to be in nature. I have this place that I would go as a kid. It's a beautiful place. It exists today, and I've been a part of it in my older years to support it. It's the third oldest public park in the country. It's called Root Hill Park, and inside the beautiful park is the conservatory. Glass like Victorian conservatory. And so when my father would be off playing tennis on the tennis courts there, he was preoccupied. And I would go in, and I would just, my imagination, I lived, I think, in my head. And I would wander through the conservatory and make stories and be like Alice in Wonderland. I loved that. Oh yeah, reading. I didn't say reading. I love to read. Oh my God, I love to read. Yep, a lot of biographies I've read. Those were the things that really inspired me. Not necessarily people in the arts, but Albert Schweitzer. Oh my God. Or Helen Keller, people like that. I always admired people who overcame things and did things with their lives and gave back to other people. Yeah, pretty impressive people. There are, so many extraordinary people. We don't focus enough on the extraordinary. And we're too face down with it, So I would just like to say that those kind of people are the ones who really inspire me.
Everyone's dressed nicely, I'm here in shorts. I
Doesn't
was
matter.
waiting for this, someone told me about this.
You look fantastic.
Who is? Okay, my name is Cordell Schneider, and I did an interview with Jeffrey, I think this is pronounced Heyer. But we were talking about this, I think it's actually German last name. I pronounced it Heyer, but like, since when did this project start? A couple months? Did not know that, learned that recently. So yeah, I found that was a matter of tech talk. You know that the lighting designer will tell you something about where you need to be to get a certain light or whatnot. And if you don't understand this terminology, that won't do you any good. So it was good to know that and to understand how different somebody looks in different kinds of light. And how actors can move in and out of different lights to get different effects. So I studied lighting and I studied costuming. Not because I wanted to be a costumer, but because I wanted to understand more of how and why they do what they do. Then I could better understand how to use a costume or how to communicate with them. So that they would so that they would understand if, as an actor, I had a problem that was literally preventing me from doing something I was supposed to do with an actor. And not just me being egotistical and saying, make me look better, or something like that. And likewise, with directing, if you don't really understand acting, if you haven't experienced it, then you don't know what's reasonable to expect of an actor, or necessarily how to communicate what it is you want. Unfortunately, many directors have this problem. They will say things like, well, it's just not right. I need something more, or I need something different. A statement that vague doesn't do the actor any good. It doesn't communicate anything. So yeah, I always liked going back and forth between different aspects of theater, using that understanding of all the different aspects in order to better work in whatever job I was currently doing for the theater. And to better communicate with and get on with all sorts of different kinds of theater functionaries. Of course, if the teacher of all of that is good, you can communicate much more. If you have a general understanding of the whole process, then you have a narrower focus. If you just understand acting, but not how to do it with the direction or how to use a playwright's work properly, it's a really good value.
Hello everyone, my name is Carlos Bocanegra, and I interviewed Andrea McDonald. So I picked up an issue of a newsletter for Monterey County Theater Awards. There would be stacks of them every month over at FEC in the lobby. So I picked up an issue and oh my goodness, look at that. Auditions for Camelot. And I knew what Camelot was. I'd seen the movie. It's about King Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot and a love story and tragedy and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going, well, what the heck? I'll just sign up and I'll just go. So I signed up and I loaded up my stuff, brought my cassette recorder so I could play my accompaniment music. I reviewed my monologue and I walked in. Well, here I am, and there's all these people. I thought I was only going to be auditioning in front of like the director and maybe one other person. And there's all these people. Well, it turns out they were all other actors who had already auditioned or were getting ready to audition for the show. I hear them call my name, and this is not really a stage. I remember it just being a big room, and they have folding chairs set up, a table, and frets. So I put on a big smile, and I walk up there and I tell them who I was, and what I was going to sing, and where my monologue came from. And I went through the whole drill. The director, who by the way is named Reg Houston, asked me a few questions. And I vaguely remember answering those questions. And he says, well, so you can sit down now. So I sat down and he was sitting more in the front. And he turned around and says, now I want you to mark this date on your calendar for the potluck. And I'm sitting there like thinking, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. So he finished the auditions. The other people auditioned, I'm thinking, wow, they're really good. So I got up the nerve and I said, well, the invite to the potluck, does that mean I'm in the show? And he said, yes, you're in the show. I expect to see you at the potluck. So my first audition, my first acceptance, my first official play was Camelot at the Outdoor Forest Theater. And I will forever be grateful to Reg Houston for seeing whatever he saw in me. Because at that time, I wasn't that fabulous. I'm still not that fabulous, but I keep working at it. But he saw something in me that he wanted and expected. And he said when we had the potluck, now you're going to be hooked. And sure enough, I'm still hooked. And it's been many, many years. So that's how it started. It doesn't look like it's ever going to end until they have to haul me away. Because I love it just as much now as I loved it when I walked into the stage for Camelot.
Hi everyone, my name is Iglali and I interviewed Andrea Felix. I got my name, from my mom, or specifically from my mom's family. She had an aunt who, she was very much loved in the family, but she had an abusive relationship with her husband. And it ended up being the result of her, not to be dramatic, but demise. So my mom wanted me to have a name that meant something. And I think that name carries into the family in ways that are indirect. In that I've seen so many women in my family, and my mom comes from a family of 7. And many of her sisters suffer domestic, physical, verbal abuse. So I think that carries a lot into the work that I'm interested in. Also, just like who I am as a person. There are a lot of conversations I wish I could have had with her, my mom, about how she feels about herself. I think a lot of that carries into how I perceive the world. And although I don't have an understanding of everything, I think it made me more aware of some of her own issues and challenges that she faced when she was alive. She was my biggest supporter. I do feel like her influence carries into my work, in that, like, I want more people to be aware of issues that women of color face. Although she didn't have a lot of knowledge of the LGBTQIA+ community, I feel like that also carries into that part of my own identity as a bisexual, non-binary person. I feel like she's empowered me to live in the moment. And I think being able to talk about things that are really challenging in these works. I've seen so many things where, we talk about abortion and reproductive health access, being a female in a male-dominated space. All these subjects really intersect with each other. And I think part of doing theater is just illuminating some of those things. I tend to choose pieces that are specifically towards friends or the LGBTQIA+ community. Not all of my work delves into like domestic violence, but I do try to seek out stories that serve and empower young women, the LGBTQIA+ community, just because more often than not, we are predominantly the demographic that receives violence and are silenced. I think that's specifically important for a lot of people who may not have as much access to the arts, being able to see and be heard within those stories. It's not necessarily to teach everything, but it's just to shine a light on that perspective. I feel like her, along with my dad, have really given me more worldviews that I can really touch on. Not everybody understands, but that's kind of the beautiful part of it too, to be able to make connections with other people. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Brandon Padilla and my narrator was Angel Bridges. I got really involved in church. My parents were very religious. I kind of got involved just on my own, and it was through the Adventist church, which was very conservative. I felt like sexuality in general was never spoken of, even heterosexuality. It was kind of, you just find the perfect girl or perfect guy, depending on your gender, and you got married and that was it. And it's never really thought about it. And also in the Avenue Church, you're expected to marry someone who's also within the church. It was kind of in high school when I got really invested in the church, and I was the only member at my school. So I was like, well, I just won't date anyone because they're not right, because they're not in the church, whatever. I carried on into college, and there were some girls who I kind of maybe thought were interested in me, but I just wasn't all that interested in them. I thought of just maybe being fed all these theologies and ideals from the church. Well, maybe these girls are good for a pastor's wife. Maybe, I don't know, too worldly, which is kind of outrageous now that I think about it. After my second year in college, I started going to the GSA meetings. That's kind of like a supportive ally. I started just listening in to these conversations about sexuality and things that we would identify as peer culture and also defining terminology. I remember sitting in a presentation within the group about gender and was like, wow, that's so different from what we're taught in church. Then I got those awful dating apps and started to meet people off campus, which again, as I said, the next town over was a good drive away. So my cultures were very long for dating. I met this guy who was going to UC Davis, and that was kind of my first maybe queer relationship. We weren't a couple, but we'd go to dinner. We would go to the movies. I feel like that was where I was first exploring it, and I felt like I was also kind of living a double life, because he didn't know where I went to school or what I was studying. Then my friends thought I was always just doing Uber driving all the time, which part of it was true, but I definitely felt like I was having this other life. And because of that, the relationship/friendship really didn't go anywhere. Also, we lived almost an hour away. It kind of made me feel the confirmation of, okay, this feels right for me. Obviously, there's a lot of layers here with religion and church and the university, and it's not being that close. So by the end of my program, at the end of the 4th year, that's where I decided I needed to come out. When I came out, the church basically told me that I had to not live in that lifestyle so that I could stay and maybe be a pastor. If I find a nice wife, I would stay married, but a wife would either pursue that or totally drop out. So if you ask them, I left, but they didn't really give me any real option to stay. That's all I got. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Calista, and I will be Mandy. I think there's a lot of different kinds of love. For example, the person who I would have considered my best pal in high school. On the surface, it was kind of a funny situation where he had a crush on me, but I never returned it. So I would not consider him my first love, but our relationship is so important to me, and I totally love him as a person and as a friend, and we still are friends many, many years later. And I do remember the first maybe flip side of that, where maybe I was underplaying. So I had a really good pal in college who I realized kind of after it was a little too late, where I was like, oh yeah, I'm in love with this person. We had a friendship for a handful of years, and I know there was love with her there. But yeah, I think that was really important. I think there's also an aspect of this too, in particular, of being parentless at a youngish age. You quickly move into found family. I think all my friends were just really, really great and supportive when I came out. There were definitely moments of feeling a bit scared, but I thought very quickly, like, oh yeah, I have friends around me who I know I love and accept me for who I am. I think those kinds of relationships, those sort of deep friendships, where you are sort of transcending something beyond romance, are so important. Then I think sometimes, if it's not wrapped up in a tight little like romantic bow, it's easy to dismiss or say that friendship love is not as important. I don't believe that. I think it's actually just as important. I think those relationships and sort of recognizing how they push the boundaries of what society tells us romance and love should actually be is really important to me.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex and I interviewed Crystal Libby. We see this all the time and have a scholarship program. So the money is really mostly going to the scholarship program that's been expanding every year. And it's just for LGBTQ plus and allies as well. The really new idea behind it is that so many people who are young, if they do come out at a young age, or whether willingly or not, there's just such a high rate of people being kicked out of their homes. Or even like me, where I paid for my own school because I moved away immediately and sort of disassociated with my family. Not in the sense that I was kicked out, but just in the sense that I just kind of was done as soon as I became an adult. It's really hard to go through that way when you see other people who have college paid for by their parents. Just don't even have to have jobs while they're at school, which is fine for them, but there's just a bunch of higher rates in the LGBT community of that not being the case. So we're just trying to help people survive on their own and be able to get access to education. So that's the biggest endeavor that we have on that. We do also use those funds for Pride every year, again with the mission to just increase the community in general. Let everybody know that we're here and that if you need, to talk to anybody, if you need to find any sort of resources, mental health resources or help, like we have it in HCOM testing. There are a lot of things that a lot of people don't even consider that LGBT people have to think about. For instance, I like to know that people that I go to, like hairstylists or doctors or anybody like that, that I'll be seeing on a regular basis. I want to know that they're not going to be prejudiced, find out that about me and then suddenly treat me different. Other people, cisgendered or anything, just don't. They never have to think about it, but I think about it every day.
My name is Devin McCauley, and I interviewed Gabriel's son. Being a former veteran, I thought about all the souls that were drafted. They had no choice, and some never came back. My spouse, she was in love with a young man, and he was drafted. He was killed in Vietnam. He was, 18, 19 years old, and I'm thinking, their stories need to be told. They didn't just die to be on a headstone somewhere. There's a whole story with that person and that sacrifice, that ultimate sacrifice they gave. Not just for this country, but for me. I don't want them to be forgotten. I want to honor them. That's why most of my photographs show a stirring and stark reminder of the spirits of Fort Ord. That they never really leave us, no matter where we are. It's all part of our history, part of my history. And I don't want them to be forgotten as Fort Ord is slowly being turned over to local municipalities. Some things will be bulldozed over, and no one would remember where this is where this is the gravesite of John Jay who gave his life, or he lived here with dozens of other men his age who were scared, who didn't want to die, who were just learning things, and their lives never came to fruition. As a matter of fact, there is a place where the first tree that was ever planted on Fort Ord, and there's a script of the movie about pirates with Abbott and Costello, and where were the black barracks located? It was segregated. They were relegated to only be the horse corps with the mules. The military, didn't believe that African Americans were capable of fighting, but they really proved their mettle. And the Japanese Americans, the Nisei, who fought in World War II, they suffered one of the largest casualties. We're the most decorated unit in the United States. The Japanese units, they all have stories to tell. There's a history of this fort, not just the soldiers individually, but all of these units that are slowly being forgotten. Currently, where Target is, where all those stores, the Ariad, Starbucks, that whole area was a motor pool. Men worked there on vehicles, they had a body shop and photographs of, and the chapels that they've torn down. There's a couple of these chapels where they've had services for all the servicemen who have gone through and those that are ready to be shipped out to war. The last time they're stateside to say a prayer for themselves and for other people. I think it's important that our history, either locally or wherever, that they be honored. I mean, I don't want to think just Veterans Day and Memorial Day or a day that we get off to have barbecues and, sleep in. We need to think of why we have those days and not just think of them only on those days, but throughout the year. Their spirit lives on Fort Ord. I have a photo display here at the CSUMB called The Spirit of Fort Ord. And there were black and white photographs of them, then and now type of pictures, very, very ghost town-like imagery of these things and of the murals. Maybe my photographs are a way to be a memorial, to kind of honor the past and the depth of Fort Ord as it was, to honor that. And every now and then, bringing it out and saying, yeah, there are sacrifices that have been made for me, and I'm always thankful for that. And I'd like to think of transition as a way for me to grow and be a better me, a better human, a better thing in this life than when I would always think growing up that the glass is always half empty or completely empty. Something more than what I am. I think for me to even ask that question, is this all that I am, means there is something more. Otherwise, I wouldn't ask that question. Kind of what I think. Kind of a weird philosophy.
So yeah, my name's Gerardo, and I interviewed Ron Danko. Yeah. We had fun. Did Native American plays. That was wonderful. Conquest of my brother up in Kalispell, the Indian reservations and all that. We did shows there. Oh, I'll tell you a show we did in Soledad at the prison. I directed 12 angry jurors. You probably don't know it. 12 angry jurors. So we did it here. And then I always wanted to teach in prison. So I wound up teaching part-time. I was full-time. And I taught one class down in Soledad, the prison. And I had a great experience. You know, the students, they were really interesting and wanted to learn, so forth. So I thought, you know, I'd like to take a show down there. So I thought, 12 angry jurors. All these guys have been tried by juries. So I contacted them. They said, yeah, bring it down. I talked to them, all the people on the jury and the actors, and they said, we'd love to do it. We took it down and we did it in the round. They didn't have a theater. 300 prisoners around us, and we were in the center. One of the jurors was really racially biased, and they started to boo him. It's the safety, you know, it's the actors in the middle of this, but they went through it, you know? And that was one of the most exciting things for those actors to do, that performance of 12 angry jurors in the Soledad prison. That's all I got.
Hi, I'm Marisol Rodriguez, and my narrator was Melissa Chen Parker. She's a intern artistic director at the Western Stage on Hartman College. Yeah, I'm married to an extroverted person, so it was really hard to win. I'm introverted, so I found out just how introverted I was. I enjoyed the shutdown because I'm guessing that you're in theater, otherwise you wouldn't be interviewing me. But it's going 24/7 as frequently as you can try to make it. It's like now, this period right now, I have so much work to do in all three of my responsibilities, major responsibilities here. I'm directing my first show of my first season here, so I'm up, my mind is turned on. When I wake up, I make notes. It's like I was just always running, and eventually you get used to it, so you don't notice it. But when we did the shutdown, even for 2 weeks, it was like, okay, wow, this is a treat. I don't feel guilty. I think this is good for me. I catched up on sleep. I actually went outside because I wasn't in the theater 24/7. Took walks, stayed in at home because we weren't supposed to see anyone. So actually, I'll confess I liked it. What makes sense to me is a whole term extroverted introvert because I like being around people, but then after a really great event, I need to go not see anyone for a while. The introverted part is that my husband can just like go to one event to another and it feeds him. And when he doesn't have that, it feels like his battery is low. With just me, it's like, yeah, that was really great. Now I need to recharge. I have to be in a really quiet place. I have to go home, read something. That's the difference. But there's a lot of folks similar to me here in the theater and actors that are just really like, how could you be introverted and be an actor or an artist? And it's easy. You kind of do your own thing. You kind of do your thing, and then you're like, okay, I'm going home. Yes, I see a lot of people, especially after COVID, that have been suffering with anxiety and depression, just like being around people again. I think just as human beings, we crave the storytelling or beauty or the creation or the process. When you shut that off, it's when people may not be able to identify it as missing art or creative endeavor. But when they experience it, they're like, oh, wow, that was a really magical thing. And it should be an everyday thing. And I was hoping that maybe we would identify live artists and actors, all of that as essential workers as well. Now that's what I do hope doesn't go back to normal. Are people not appreciating that as much? It's like now, okay, now it's back to paying very expensive things like gas or how am I going to get to school? So again, our attention has shifted, but I think that's our job as artists to just go, hey, remember, you need this part too. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Garrett Hambaro, and I interviewed Stephen Lyles. And it said, opening soon, I at Regency, Waikiki, all so-and-so. So I called so-and-so, someone picked up the phone, and I said, yeah, my name is Lyles. I'm a jewelry designer. I have a little store in Aspen, and I like to find a place for you. And the guy says, Lyles, I was in your store in Aspen. Goddamn, I couldn't believe my luck. Okay, now I got a guy who knows who I am from my jewelry store in Aspen. I got the goddamn store at the Hyatt Regency, just like that. How? I ain't got no money. Now all of a sudden I got a store across from Waikiki Beach. Jesus, that's just the way my luck went. Just chilling, place where I needed it, when I needed it. I didn't make a plan to do. It happened. And that's the way life's gone for me. Yes, my good luck, see. That's when I rented that house at Diamond Head, and I had a store. And God, life was good. But my daughter was terribly, terribly messed up human being. She ran away to Hollywood. I tried everything. I bought her a car, sent her to college. Anything I could, I tried. But I couldn't. She hated me. She despised me. And she took the teenage years and it got worse. I tried every day. I drove her to school every day, and I taught her to drive a car. I did everything I could possibly do. And at that time, I didn't know anything about depression. And very few people did in those days. But to this day, she's never left Hollywood. She's always lived alone down there in an apartment by herself, and she's gotten by. Now she's in the system and taken care of, and paid for expenses and for medical and all that. Thank God she's in California, where we have the best system for helping people of that type. I let her go out and get food to eat, but you know, I was never in a condition to where I could do that much about it. My wife wouldn't, when she was young, my wife wouldn't let me touch her, wouldn't let me near her, you know? I took her to gymnastics classes, I took her to swimming classes, Aspen and Sun Valley. I gave her horseback riding lessons. I bought her ice skates, I gave her ice skating lessons. I did everything I could possibly do. Like think to keep her, to make her happy. But it didn't work. So that's the big failure of my life. But I've learned, my mother helped me a lot during my years when I was struggling and said, never owe me anything, Jimmy. All you gotta do is for her what I did for you. And one of the reasons I have no money today is I've been taking care of her, sending her money. That's all I can do. But we can't even stand being in the same room together. We have a good phone call, we do. And it took maybe until 5, 6, 7 years ago until she said, I love you, Dad. It was the first time I've ever heard those words. And I had to ask her to tell me that. And now she tells me that. And she calls every week or two, and I talk to her. Thank you.
What's up, you guys? I'm Ewan Banana. I interviewed my friend who wanted to stay anonymous. A lot of my childhood is blurry. Like I have like bits and pieces I just don't remember. And a lot of my formative years throughout my teens, I spent in and out of like conversion therapy retreats and stuff and living with my tia. Because I always knew that I was some sort of queer growing up and always been very vocal about it. I also wasn't really embodying or gender stereotypes with my family. So we had a lot of collision in those regards. So a lot of my formative years I did spend in and out of religious retreats, conversion therapy sites, or just living with my kids and stuff. They could never be like propagandized or marketed as conversion retreats or conversion therapy because they've been banned for a couple of decades now. But the premise of them still stays the same. My mom is like a very like Catholic zealot, so she's very embedded in these types of shady organizations. And so when I started to explore, obviously when you're a child, you say some fruity stuff or you behave in fruity manners. And it's like, oh, they're kids. But as I was entering my teens and puberty and stuff, my family was like, oh shit, they're super gay. So my mom would be like, oh, you're going to spend some time with your tia or something. Then she would drop me off at this one like monastery. Yeah. And she would drop me off in super far places. And then some of them would be warehouses even. And it would just be myself and a couple of other people. I think I was always the youngest, but it would range from like 16 to 25. For the most part, you had to get signed out by either the person who put you in there or by an emergency contact. And what was cool was that most of the time my dad would be the emergency contact. He would come in and would take me up early sometimes, and we would just hang out and do some other stuff. But no, they're really weird because I don't remember too much of it. I try not to think about it super often. But we would get there and we would have like feeding times, we would have activity times, and then we would have like group therapy times. And a lot of the group therapy times were just like really annoying and like super sad. But since I was always the youngest, I wasn't allowed to be in like a lot of the long, larger conversations because it would be people talking about having sexual relations or intimate relationships, like same sex or queer relationships and stuff like that. And they're like, oh no, you can't hear it, you're too young, like it's going to further influence you. So a lot of the times it was just me, and I'd have to like do a bunch of these, oh, I'll never be a lesbian type of thing, like right over and over again. There were times when they would like force you to watch like heterosexual pornography and stuff, and they'd say this is what you should be like attracted to. Like this is the natural type of relationships and stuff. Even as like a young child, it's just uncomfortable to see because I've never seen pornography in my life. Obviously, it's not something I would go and search out on my own, but they would like force you to watch it. It was just a lot of weird stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Liz Howard, and I interviewed Ezra Lambert. Don't get in that car with your drunk brother, he will kill you. When I was growing up, my brother was always very hostile towards me. He was a man's man, so when we were growing up, he would make fun of me for being too skinny, too feminine, and so at some point, he started drinking in the 7th grade. Then I turned 16, 17, and he said we should be buddies. I'm not homophobic, and I, Ezra, was trying to start a film career. I'm taking these film classes. I'm thinking of going to college for film. I was going to start my own YouTube channel. That night, I had a plan to turn my bedroom into a studio, but then he was being sad, annoying, and drunk with his girlfriend. I didn't know he was drunk, which was dumb. He was like, bro, come party with my shitty redneck friends. Come party with me. And I couldn't say no to that. He was trying, or he made it seem like he was trying. So I got into the car and he started brake driving. We weren't a mile away from our house when we go over a 40-foot cliff, and I was in the middle seat with a lap belt, so my neck got whiplash. I hit my forehead on the dash, and his girlfriend got a broken rib. He was in the driver's seat. We landed in a dry creek with his head outside the car in a hole pinned by the truck. His arm was also pinned by the truck with his arm stretched. His nerves damaged and me with a broken neck, paralyzed from the waist down to my hands, and I couldn't do anything. But I could still breathe. I was very cognizant the whole time. She's freaking out, and I'm like, Tammy, please just try and walk up the hill. It's not that steep. It was a cliff, but she was like, I can't. She couldn't breathe. She had a broken rib, so she walked the other direction and found a house with a bunch of wooden ducks and a phone that worked, but she didn't know where we were. She wasn't from Carmel Valley, the woods, so she pointed them in the wrong direction, and it took them 4 hours to find us. It started snowing, and they found us, so I was rescued by the volunteer fire department. People I despise saved my life. Cowboy hat, racist, homophobe saved my life. Pulled me out of the car and put me on a gurney and took me to a field where I was airlifted to Santa Clara. I spent 5 weeks in the hospital recovering, barely relearning how to walk. I spent 3 months in a wheelchair and immediately went back to school as soon as I could walk again. My brother went to jail. They sent him to the shitty rehab called Jericho, where they exploit the labor of incarcerated addicts to build houses. And after he got out of that, he said he was cured of his alcoholism and that he didn't have a problem. He immediately started drinking again, and we were living together while I was recovering. And he was gaslighting me about how I need to do more to learn to walk again, so that he would feel better about this. And that's when I started learning about disability politics. Anyone can become disabled. It's a human condition, and the body is not worth less because it's not conforming to this perfect idea of the body. Imagine learning that at 18 years old. Infuriating, right?
Hey guys, I'm Ethan, and I interviewed Sam Gomez. I remember thinking to myself that night after they tried to pray the day away. I told them I would try, to be a part of the family and everything. And I remember almost kind of believing it myself. So it was just like really wild, thinking back. Yeah, I think that it was definitely kind of like a make or break moment that night. And so I did end up trying for a whole week. I even had a friend, a guy friend at the time, who expressed interest in me. So I tried to go on a date with them actually. And ending up just being like really sad because at the time too, I had stopped talking to my partner, who was a girl at the time. I just ended up, he tried to kiss me and I was like, oh no. So I told him what happened, my whole story, and he was pretty understanding. So I ended up getting a friend, like an ally. So even though my family had wanted me to try to like, develop a relationship or something. So after that, I went back to my dad's as well to go back to visit him for half the week. And then I think I ended up coming to my grandma on my dad's side. She was actually the first elderly woman in my family to tell me that it was okay for me to be gay. So for me to hear those words coming from someone, an elder in my family, it was just a complete turnaround from what I'd heard from my grandma on my mom's side. And so her harsh words had pierced me so much where it was like internalized trauma. It was like hating myself essentially for being myself. But to hear my grandma on my dad's side speak those words, I accept you, I love you always, I love you even more for that. It was really kind of like that pivotal moment for me. It made me feel like, okay, you know what? I don't have to lie to be somebody else to make my family happy. I have family who are going to be here and like, I'm lucky enough to have that expressed. So that was the moment when I decided when I go back to my mom's, I'm just gonna pack my bags and leave. So that's exactly what I did. It was probably one of the hardest moments that the hardest decision I had to make. But I think it was ultimately for the best. Eventually my dad ended up coming around and tried to understand more, or just accept me and love me unconditionally. So yeah, that was something that I really leaned on, my relationship with my dad and my grandma. And then of course my aunt who lived with us at the time, who was also queer. So it was a really supportive environment. For the first time in my life, living with them, I felt like I could just breathe and be myself and not have to walk on an eggshell, or just not feel like the energy getting sucked out of my life from trying to be someone I'm not.
Hi everyone, I'm Faye Billings and I interviewed Aaron Snyder. Man, I want us as a queer community to be out, and I don't want us to just be out in Pacific Grove, I really want it to be clear that there's queer people all over the county and that all of their experiences are different, but they're all queer, And I want to get away from this feeling that I feel like a lot of times queer folks move here and they're like, there's nothing here. It's like there are thousands of us that are out here, and it's just a matter of finding them and being like, get out, come to this event, come meet other people, So my dream would really be that there's enough queer things that are happening that we don't even need a gay bar necessarily. But we have spaces where people can show up and be like, I'm new here, I feel very alone, how can I connect to my community? And we'll have the resources there to do that, I also feel very strongly that I want queer people to know that having a straight community is good and having folks from the straight community is important, but having a queer community is like magic. It's just different, And I think a lot of times I see folks not really recognize that it's definitely complicated and people are complicated, but like for me growing up, or gay growing up is what I call it in my 20s, when I moved to Portland, Oregon with my ex at the time, I got really heavily involved. I got connected with a friend of mine who I was working with who was queer, and my ex at the time was doing drag and did drag at a bar called Embers. It was like the dingiest drag bar that you ever witnessed in your entire life, but it was one of the longest running ones, right? So I like grew up in that bar and I made a really close queer community and saw the value in hanging out with other queer people. And
and not having to limit yourself from what you're talking about, not having to explain or be like the token, right? So I want other people to have that too. Even if you grew up here in small Monterey, to be like there's value in hanging out with other queer people. I think for me personally, I really want to continue figuring out what stability looks like. And I think even more so, it looks like putting down roots. I mean, I think I told you, I never felt like I had roots. And I recently just switched out my driver's license to a California driver's license. And I've never done that anywhere else. I was sort of in tears getting it, you know? Like I want to put roots here. It feels really good to be doing it in the space that I grew up in, to return home and be like, this is the spot that I want to go. I hope in the future I can keep putting those roots down by creating good community here, creating good spaces to be, and continuing to do good work in that area.
Hi guys, I'm Sam and I interviewed Mike McDaniel. 3.5 weeks in Costa Rica, month and a half in Mexico. Every day was the same. Wake up early, pull your board shorts on, walk out of the little cabana or the bungalow out onto the sand, check the surf. I was with my buddy Tracy, who's kind of an intense guy. I won't go into detail about him, but he's a guy who can pound a quadruple espresso and then not even eat or think about eating until like 4 p.m. Like first thing in the morning, he's just wired on espresso and he just goes like a squirrel until it's time to put a big meal down at the end of the day. So we walk out onto the sand. We would go, if there were waves, we'd go out in the water and surf. If there weren't waves, we'd at least go for a swim. Like showering wasn't really a thing. We would surf multiple times during the day and the ocean was how you got clean. So if there weren't waves, we'd at least go for a swim. So we felt like, hey, you know, we didn't stop. Now we can go get a coffee. So we go drink espresso, maybe have a little pastry or something, go back, check the surf again, see if the tide was right. Go play ping pong. There was a little place, like it was a bar that pretty much was open from mid-afternoon until really late in the evening. But if you went by there at about 10 in the morning or whatever, there was somebody there working, cleaning up from the night before, and you could just play ping pong. So we'd go play ping pong for a few hours, go back, take a nap, check the surf again. Most days were 3 surf sessions if the waves were good. And so, yeah, just kind of did that for a little while. It was awesome, super fun. So do that sometime in your life. You know, you're in college, and take that seriously, of course. But at some point, yeah, go check out, go have a rad adventure where you don't have to be anywhere at any certain time, and adventures around the corner. Do that stuff. I don't regret it. But you know, somebody young now, you're young. It's different now for you guys than it was when I was young. We have so much more freedom than you guys do on every level, you know, like literally every level. And without going into all that, it's got to be way harder for someone your age now than it was for someone like me when I was your age back then. So maybe the thing that young people, I think, need to hear is that you don't need to have so much pressure on yourself. You don't need to force yourself down this path that literally everyone else tells you that you need to force yourself down. I mean, I don't know, maybe this isn't the hardest moment. Maybe the hardest moment was some number of years ago, and maybe it's getting a little bit easier now. Because I think now you wouldn't have to click very many times to find articles written by someone young, like you, maybe somebody a couple years older than you, who went down the college path and decided to do something else, and it turned out okay. Maybe you can find those articles. You know, I don't want to call this advice because I don't know that it can work out for anyone just because I say it. But I would say, do whatever you need to do to take the pressure off of yourself. If that means finding your own path, then find your own path. And you don't have to listen to all the voices. You don't have to listen to the people saying you've got to do this, other people saying you've got to do that. Like, find strength inside you to do that, to do what you think is right for you. Because ultimately, we all know what's right for us, right? And maybe you'll make mistakes, and that's okay, because life's about mistakes too. So you make a decision because you're confident about it. Okay, it didn't work out. Okay, you try a new thing, you know? So that's just a way of saying you don't have to crush yourself under the pressure. You don't have to be crushed by the pressure. Take the pressure off, take a deep breath, look around for an interesting path.
I don't really have formal clothes, so I just came back from Ross to get the shirt. I know it's a little funny on me, but
That's
hey,
nice.
my name is Keith Collins, and I interviewed Evelyn Singer. I definitely think it's always important for everyone to impress themselves first before impressing others. But I think just how I grew up and the way I think of things, I feel like if I get the validation from, for example, my parents, and like I get the validation from them, then I feel a sense of pride, and I feel like, okay, now it's time where I can congratulate myself. I can relax. I feel like I'm very tense in certain situations. So I feel like validation just comes when I know I'm being validated. And then I ended up just like, okay, you got this. You're doing it. In terms of overthinking, then yeah, I definitely do get in my head. I get in my head for overthinking for everything. Overthinking in school assignments, if I'm doing my best. Overthinking if I make my parents proud. Overthinking if I'm a great friend or not. Overthinking if I am on the correct path of what I need to do and what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, I do get in my head a lot. If I'm ever just thinking and staring into space, I'm definitely just in my head. All my overthinking makes me get very high anxiety, so I don't think I handle certain situations best because I overthink because of my anxiety. If I do overthink and then take time away from a certain situation, I definitely come up with better solutions and how I can handle things after that moment is gone down. I think I do lack the way I come about things. I feel like I react very quick, and that isn't the best thing. I feel like I need to sometimes just take a deep breath. Sometimes just take a deep breath, think about it, and react. Thank you.
My name is Mary Ballmer, and I'm a youth worker. Being a coyote, the adventurousness, circumstances kind of led me. I never did future planning, and well, that's left over from my childhood. We couldn't make plans, and we didn't really make plans. If it was today, we would have never gotten away with more than a move or two because we tracked to the path of it. But Mom managed to get a new deal and get us into a new house. Sometimes we shared a house, sometimes we had a house on our own. Often it was in a poor area of town, although my high school years we lived in better neighborhoods. But it's very difficult to go fresh into a new school and make new friends when you get established. When we were leaving my father, we left El Paso and drove to California, and I managed to skip through all the multiplication tables as I came back to California. So I had a lot of deficits in learning from those kinds of moves because nobody was really tracking me very much. So it was sad and it was difficult. I look at those things now so differently from a child's eye view, and I realize that some of my greatest strengths come from my ability to be able to do that in the world. It's kind of sad, kind of lonely, one pair of shoes, a couple of skirts. We didn't really have much more. We actually had gone to the church with this controversial, so it was borderline this, literally. And I also chose not to have children. I mean, that was a very active choice. I never wanted to do that. I felt like I raised 2 kids, it was. And I also thought, well, I might not be the best parent because I watched so many people who were broken for children. It's a very difficult chain to break, and I've written it many times that I break that chain. I will never pass that along. I will practice and practice until I don't pass on anything that came from there through me. It won't be me as a source, and I had to do that thinking as a child because everything was so upsetting and I didn't have any safe place to go. So I would find myself wanting to recount my story to people to say, oh, this is why I am the way that I am. And here's my sad story, and go through all the wax and hits and stuff. And then I realized, that isn't who I am. And I didn't want those stories in my brain. And I would literally say, okay, if I think those thoughts, if I remember that memory, I'm gonna put up what I thought. That was what I thought. And I'll say, thinking that again. Okay, stop. And then sooner and sooner, I wasn't playing over and over. But that was my own technique, like, I refuse to be that history, I won't do it. If you really think about it, most of the time we're in our brains. Our brains are not us, but they're very busy things brains are. They're designed to be very busy, and I'm very busy. When you start to think about what you're actually doing, even if you're just sitting for 5 minutes, you realize that most of the time you're not actually present, you're really aware of your surroundings. You're thinking about something, you're running an old tape or a memory, or you're planning a future event. But there are times within life where if you stop for a minute and actually are truly in the moment, the world explodes in your head. It's just too incredibly cosmic. It's way too big to consider, and it just blows my mind. So I think being in nature, being close to nature is why I like doing it, because it's the time when I can truly be present in the moment. And I think you can do it in conversation in other ways, but it's completely present. It's a tricky thing to do. You do a kind of work, you have to train your mind. Sorry, that's it.
Hello, my name is Zoe Atlas, and my narrator is one of my closest friends and greatest teachers, Patricia Doler. I had parents that said, you can be and do anything. And society told me otherwise as I got older. And, you know, one of my assets is my ability to observe and sense. And it's not just observation, it's how we feel. And I think that's why we're both so good with horses, because horses, their senses are so acute. Their hearing, their vision, their sense of smell, everything is far superior to humans. But in addition, they have this intuitive sense that about something doesn't feel right. And Zoe and I share that. And I don't know how you developed it, but mine was on my family's property where I had to, if something doesn't feel right, there was no one out there that was just going to protect me. I had to, no, something doesn't feel right, I'm out of here, you know? Which brings me to a thought about fight and flight. So horses are flight animals, and human beings are what's known as fight and flight. In other words, we will do one or the other. Horses, although especially stallions, which my latest horse was a stallion, they will fight as well, because they will fight to protect the herd. But that's not their choice. Their choice is to run. And one of the reasons that horses have survived in the world, the main reason, is because their ability to flee predators has been exceptional. And I think women, how we have survived in the world is because our ability to flee is exceptional. Not to say that we won't, especially a mother. You endanger my child, I'm telling you, there is no thought. There is no thought, I'm just gonna react and kill you. And mares, female horses will do the same, right? Yeah, that's the only time you will actually see them fight, but it's very, very rare. So survival for me was mostly flight, right? Although obviously I had an acute sense of fight in me as well, because I fought for my career and I fought for things in my life. I fought for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. I was taught that by my mother. She instilled that. I remember a little girl, I always have this memory. There was a little girl who rode the bus. And we were the first stop to be picked up because we lived so far out of the school district and the last stop at the end of the day. And there was this little girl named Mary Hines. We must have been 11, maybe not that old, 10. And I remember children picking on her. Now that I'm older, I can identify that she was economically disadvantaged. I think she was a daughter of a single mom. Of course, I admire her immensely now. She wore clothes that appeared to be secondhand. She had red hair. She had teeth that needed dental attention. And she was brand new, right? So there's that. She was not part of the peer group, and kids on the bus picked on her. And I remember telling my mom, for whatever reason about this, And my mom looked me straight in the eye and said, "You must stand up for her because she can't do it for herself." And I did. And I think that's where it all, because throughout my life, that's what I've done. That's who I am. And that's what courses teach you. That's what HIT has taught me, to get past my ego. Number one, you can't make the right decision if your ego gets in the way. And believe me, my ego got in the way a lot with HIT. But he taught me that, nope, that was not gonna work. Thank you, HIT. And so fire teaches you that because it's inviting you. And the invitation might be that you go in immediately and do what's called an offensive attack, a direct attack on it, and you push it from the burned area back onto the unburned area. But that invitation may not be one that you should take in that moment, and you may have to think of some other way you're going to join the party. Like, say you go in from a different location, or you don't go in at all, or you take a deep breath and wait a moment before, so that your adrenaline doesn't take over and you do something that you shouldn't. Horses are the same thing, because when they're doing whatever they're doing and they're big, powerful beings and your adrenaline is off the charts, you take a breath. But you have to. It's time stands still and everything slows down. One of the best things about being of course, being dyslexic that Zoe and I share, the gift of dyslexia, is that we are used to multidimensional input coming at us all. In fact, we are at our best when it is. And fire service, that's what an emergency is like. An emergency scene is multidimensional layers, and my brain is slowing down finally. It's meeting my brain, right? And that's what horses do. It's multidimensional. You are having to, it meets you. It's on pace with your brain finally. I can't tell you, Zoe, when I first went on an emergency scene, and we call it chaos. And I'm thinking, wow, it's as if my brain is going, now I need to do this, and now I need to do this, and now I need to do this, and now I need to, and so horses require that same set of skills. And that is why most great athletes are dyslexic, because it is multidimensional stuff coming at you. You can't figure out which side of your body you should use so you get better at using both sides, right? You're much better than most people at using both sides of your body to do what's necessary, so you're more equal. And my guess is Hidden might be what you would consider dyslexic, because he's less like other horses. Horses generally have one side that's better than the other side, but Hidden is a lot more balanced. And a lot of that has to do with the set of his eyes. His eyes aren't on the side of his head like most horses, they are forward this way, so he can see better than most horses. But my guess is Hidden would be considered having a gift of dyslexia. It's why horsemanship meets you, because your brain is slowing down finally. You can almost be linear, but you're not linear because we never think linear. But it's slowing down finally, which would mostly overwhelm a non-dyslexic brain. But for us, it's finally, yay! So chaos is good for us. Hello, my name is Lauren Mishimoto, and he's my father, Lauren Mishimoto.
you want me to read it with you?
The reparations are interesting because I waited so long to do it. The internment affected the East generation more than the East generation. So BSA, which is the first generation, a lot of them had passed by the time the reparation was signed. And they wrote it to only those who are still surviving and received the reparations. And so a lot of the older people had already passed. So it's just the younger generation that were in the camps in their teenage years, maybe their early 20s, were still surviving at that time. And the younger kids too. My father always said that we didn't have to do the reparations because the younger generations didn't suffer as much as the older generation. That they should have just done it sooner. So my father and his siblings all donated money in various ways. My aunt Mildred created a scholarship fund. My father's son donated to the Historical Society and the hospital. My aunt Mary donated to the church. I'm not sure if my aunt Patty did, but they all felt it was better to do something with the money than keep the money. In general, my generation of Japanese Americans don't speak Japanese because of the internment, which happened because of World War II. So after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and President Roosevelt signed the executive order for all Japanese Americans to report to relocation centers. That experience drove the Japanese Americans to be more American. But a lot of them dropped the language. So you wouldn't speak Japanese. You would only speak English. So the Japanese American way, more or less, is to not really speak about things. And so a lot of the stories we never shared from generation to generation. Only recently that people started talking about it and some questions about the experience. The stories started to come out. When I'm asked to speak to the students at elementary schools and such, they ask what it was like in there. And I tell them, well, I can't tell you because I wasn't there. But I tell them to imagine the government telling you, you have to report somewhere tomorrow with no more than one bag. And you have to leave everything else behind. How do you decide what to take with you? You can't take your pet. You can't take all your toys. What do? You can only take what you can carry in one small suitcase. And the only thing that will ever leave you is what you can learn and what you can absorb. Because what's in your head can never be taken away by the government. So when I speak to younger people, I tell them, it's your responsibility to make yourself better
and teach yourself. Because your knowledge will never be taken away from you. You may lose it over time, but it will never be taken away from you. Thank you. He's very honest. He's a gratitude.
Good job. Come on up here. Really awesome message. I think we all learned a whole lot, and you're an amazing professor. We really appreciate all your time and effort, and thank you so much.
Proud of each of you, so I appreciate this a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Always going back to retreat that
I know.
April, you want to tell us?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, narrators too.
Closer. Closer.
Okay, good. 1, 2, 3, cheers.
Cheers.
1, 2, 3. Smile.
All
1, 2,
right.
See, yeah.
Perfect.